doing our cultural presentation on Burma, also known as Myanmar. I'm Ellen.
I'm Emily.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Stacy.
Burma's official name is Myanmar, but up until very recently they were controlled by an illegitimate military government with very poor human rights records, similar to North Korea. So it's common for the rest of the world to not recognize that government's decision to be called Myanmar. And so, however, recently in the past year, they've officially converted over to a more democratically elected government. But because it's so recent, most of our culture information comes from the past 50 years about when they were still under military control. But we'll let you know when something comes up that may be changing in the near future. Right? Burma is 261,789 square miles, about the same size as Texas, and it's bordered by Bangladesh to the west, India and China to the north, Laos and Thailand to the east, and the southern portions are on the coast and face the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. In 1962, the military regime sought to isolate the nation and institute nationalist policies and called themselves the Socialist Republic of the Union of Burma. There was forced resettlement and forced labor dislocation of many ethnic groups, and a large number of refugees fled to neighboring countries. There are about 300,000 refugees in Thailand, Bangladesh, and India, mostly from ethnic minorities. And there are also ethnic minorities in the United States. 1988 to 2010 was a period of even more increased military regime control, and within a span of 4 days in 1988, 10,000 protesters were killed during widespread civil unrest. The violence from the military provoked condemnation from the rest of the world, and the leadership responded to try to earn favor with the rest of the world again by holding elections, but the elections didn't turn out how the leadership wanted, so they didn't change anything. In March of 2011, a civilian government was sworn in to replace the military junta. And in March 2016, Myanmar's parliament elected Hitin Kyaw as the country's new president. Hitin Kyaw was elected to the position by 360 votes, a little less than a third of the parliament's available 652 votes. However, Aung San Suu Kyi acts as the unofficial leader. She was a female leader of the party that Hitin Kyaw belongs to. There are 135 ethnic groups in Burma. The majority is the Burman ethnicity with 68%, and minorities include the Shan, Karen, Rakhine, Chinese, Indian, Mon, and others. As you can see here, a large portion of the minority groups are around the borders of Myanmar, and the center is Burman culture, ethnicity. And so during the military regime, a lot of their major control was in the Burman central areas, and a lot of the more minority cultures in the outskirts. It was very rural land areas, and so there wasn't too much control. They had a little bit of independent freedom just because of their rural location.
Okay, so depending on what source you look at, about 85 to 90% of the country practices the Buddhist religion. And if you look at just the Burman ethnicity, that percentage is even higher. So most of the ethnic minorities practice other religions. And so, for example, 4% of the Burmese population is Christian, and it's comprised mostly of the Karen and Chin populations. This is due to a old legend in Karen folklore that says it describes a white brother and a lost book. And so when white missionaries came to Burma, a lot of Karens became Christians, and so about 40% of that minority group professes a Christian faith now. And so other beliefs that are practiced are Islam and Hinduism, as well as animistic beliefs, which is the worship of nature. So like the sky, animals, trees, and things like that. So the form of Buddhism that is primarily practiced is called Theravada Buddhism, and it's combined with animistic and superstitious beliefs. So the key tenets of Buddhism say that life is suffering, and that suffering is caused by craving or desire, and then that you can seek salvation, happiness, and achieve nirvana by overcoming this craving or desire. And the way to do that is primarily through like living a good moral life and like this balance of good and bad deeds. And so, like I said earlier, about 85 to 90% of the population practices the Buddhist religion. So it heavily influences the society as a whole. And for most young people between the ages of 10 and 16 will go to live in a monastery and begin the journey to monkhood. However, only some of them actually complete it. And women aren't allowed to be monks at all. They are allowed to be nuns, however, but nuns don't share the same social status that monks do. So monks are like the highest order of society within Burma. So like I was talking about earlier, there's this idea of good and bad deeds. So Buddhists believe in reincarnation. And so at death, like you are reincarnated into another form, and that's based on like your merit in your previous life.
So this is traditional clothing of Burma. The women wear pasos. It's a silk fabric that's a floral design. They sew it in a cylindrical shape, and then they have it around their waist. Sometimes they tie it around their front and hold their baby, or sometimes they tie it around their head and carry goods. The men wear longis, and it's tied around their waist, and it's pretty much the same type of fabric. Sometimes use it like as a protection for rain.
She got everything right except the women's clothing are called longis and the men's clothing are called pasos.
She got everything right. But you know, in India, the men's clothing is called, we call it lungi, L-U-N-G-I. Yes, I can see why there's a little bit of that confusion. But the American, what would be Americans call it?
Skirt.
Sarong. Yes.
I have a question, just real quick. So we're talking about the monks. So you said like it's the highest order, I guess. Do you know what it takes to become a monk? Like what they have to go through? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know exactly. I just know that like they have to, like monks have to adhere. I guess they have to go through all the teachings, and they have to adhere to a certain lifestyle and like discipline. But I don't know specifically what the order.
You know, they have a seminary, you know, and so you've got to leave home and go live in that seminary. And I'm sure
And
it's
they start as children.
Okay.
So these are some table etiquette. People in Burma, they usually sit on the floor and they put their meals on a low-seated table. They usually eat one meal in the morning and then one meal right before it gets dark. Rice is a main component of many of the meals. They have vegetables and fish and fruit. They also serve curry, but it's not like the Indian curry. It's heavier and more oily. And no alcoholic beverages are served with meals. They usually do juice or tea. So here is a common ceremony in Burma. It's called Gangmyeon. It's a water festival, and it's celebrated during their New Year, which is in the middle of April. And so people are in the streets, and everyone's splashed with water, and they wash the Buddhas with water. This is another celebration. It's called Kaisen. It's the time that Buddha reached enlightenment and nirvana. People march to banyan trees and wash them with scented water. And this is the start of when men become novices, which is their start of becoming a monk.
And you'll know what a banyan tree is. It's these huge trees that have aerial roots that come off the tree and actually then, I don't know if they kind of then burrow into the ground and but they form these huge, do you have a picture?
I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah. But they're these huge trees, and the reason why the banyan tree is so revered is because when Buddha got enlightened, he sat under a banyan tree and was meditating. And so then that's why the banyan tree has become a symbol, as God as a place in Buddhism. Sorry.
So in the Burman culture, the head is considered the most sacred, and the feet are considered dirty. So when you go into a home or a temple, you remove your shoes, and when you sit down, your feet should not be pointed at anyone. So a lot of the time, you could kind of see it on the food slide. They sit with their feet tucked under them so that it's not pointing at anyone. And then the head should never be touched. So for kiddos, you can't just sit there and pat them on the head. That's considered very inappropriate. When they address people, they don't really use personal names as much as they use titles. So they'll call an older woman auntie, or they'll call an older man uncle or teacher or something like that. I believe, I'm not really sure what they call the younger generation. I think it's like sister and brother and stuff like that. No, they just call them. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure about that, but I might go look that up. And then whenever you accept a gift, they accept two hands. They accept it using two hands, so you kind of hold out your hands like this, and that's considered respectful for you to do that. Also, when they shake hands, which isn't very common, but when they do, they hold their right hand, it's done with their right hand, and they hold their right elbow using their left hand. So it's just support, and that's also considered respectful. Thanks, Evelyn. You're welcome. And it's also considered very inappropriate to lose your temper in public. So for the family dynamics, the father is called the lord of the forefront of the house. That's what that kind of translates to in English. And that calls to mind a very stern father figure, but in reality, he's just a big softie. The mother is more the disciplinarian in the family. She kind of sees through their little shenanigans and calls them on it. But she's in charge of the rest of the house, so she is in charge of like household chores and everything else that goes on, including teaching children. They teach children. The mother is primarily in charge of teaching them discipline, morals, and rules of society and stuff like that. So she has a lot of authority in the household. And then parents are usually very indulgent with young children. Like if a baby's crying, they're not just going to leave their baby crying. Sometimes here, if the baby's hungry, but or the baby's trying to sleep, and you're trying to get them to sleep on their own, you kind of leave them crying. They won't really do that as much. If the baby cries, they'll pick them up. But when they do get to a certain age and it's time to start teaching them the certain rules and everything, they're very good about doing that and making sure they know what to do. Humor is a big part of the family culture. They laugh and play just like we do with their parents. We do with our parents. It's a fun environment. And then corporal punishment is very unusual, like spanking and stuff like that. But it's normally done by the lower socioeconomic families who are less educated and might be under financial stress. If any abuse is suspected, neighbors will intervene. It's not just gone unnoticed. And then for gender roles, we kind of talked about it a little bit with the monks and the nuns. They are forbidden to enter certain parts of the religious temples, like the men can enter the central portion and then the women can't. And it's widely believed that women cannot reach enlightenment. And there are a few unspoken rules for women, such as it's not legal or anything, but it would be considered improper if a woman drank alcohol in public or rode on the top of a bus or boats. But compared to the surrounding countries, they're actually still fairly progressive because the most influential politician is a female. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi, and it's just a very good example that women in Burma still have a lot of freedom compared to surrounding countries.
Traditional occupations in Burma, they have been historically thought of as the rice basket of the world. They're one of the largest exporters of rice. So the majority of people live in rural areas and rely on sustenance farming and fishing or crop farming of rice. Men prepare land for planting, thresh rice, and transport goods to the markets. Women transplant rice seedlings, do domestic work at home and raise the children, and they can also be like professions such as teaching and nursing, and commonly female-dominated roles. Both men and women as adults participate in harvesting, petty trade, and handcrafts at local markets. They can also be spirit mediums or religious healers, and they also participate in music and theater in the communities. Here's some pictures of a man fishing, a little boy transporting goods either from a market or to a market, one of a small local market with handmade goods and crafts, and then men transporting some sorts of goods off of a boat. Children's occupations, most of this information is when they're under military rule, and since they are no longer, it may be improving, but boys usually go to public school and receive some education in monasteries, and few girls are educated and are mostly educated at home or in domestic type activities. Since 1962, when the military rule was installed, educational infrastructure deteriorated, and 66 to 75% of children dropped out of elementary school before 5th grade. Curriculum is scrutinized and controlled by the military regime and the government, and it's often forbidden to teach languages other than Burmese. But like I said, this either has already changed since March of this year or will be changing very soon. Also, child soldiers during the military regime. In 2002, it was reported Burma had the highest number of child soldiers in the world, estimated at 70,000, and most likely more. 2011 introduced the introduction of civilian government. The number of child soldiers has steadily decreased since then, and in 2015, 146 former child soldiers were released from captivity, including 28 who were still underage. So most of those child soldiers had grown to adults and had spent their entire childhoods and most likely lives as soldiers.
This is what a typical house looks like in Burma. They're usually made of bamboo and wood. The walls are usually made of bamboo, and the flooring is usually made of wood. The front part is the veranda, which is where guests and neighbors come over, and that's where they're entertained. The middle part of the house is the living area, like similar to a living room in the United States. The back part of the house is where cooking takes place. That's a covered area where rice is stored. Healthcare in Burma is not very good. They have few hospitals, a few doctors. They don't receive a lot of funding for medical professionals, medications, equipment, so many people have to rely on home remedies, and many illnesses they believe come from malicious spirits.
So the obesity rate in Burma is about 4% in adults. This is really low compared to the US, which is about 30 to 35%. And you can see on the image as well, so they fall in like the 0 to 5% range. And children, like about 22% of children under 5 are actually underweight. So obesity is not a common thing. It would be considered very atypical in Burma. Our client was Bonnie Grape, and so she's depicted in the movie. She's a mother of 4. She and her youngest son, Arnie, appears to have autism spectrum disorder in the movie, and she seems to favor him. She calls him her sunshine, and seems to dote on him. So she is a widow. Her husband hung himself, I believe, 7 years ago, and she hasn't left the house since then. Has become very obese. So she is a stay-at-home mom, but she is rarely depicted as doing anything in the household. She's usually on the couch and isn't seen showering, toileting, cooking, or dressing herself. Even meals are prepared by her daughter Amy, and then the children set the table and bring the food to her. So she relies on the older children to work and run her home. So Amy takes care of the cooking, and then Gilbert takes care of Arnie, and she supervises, as they say in the movie.
So for the occupation we chose sitting down for a meal, and we chose that because the Burmese culture eats meals at a low table, so she would have to be able to get down to the floor in order to eat with her family, which is an important part of the day So I think that's the only part where they all are together at the same time. So we decided, we have two different frameworks, and the first one was a biomechanical framework. So the therapeutic activity would be to grab a chair and set it around the stair area somewhere where she would be able to sit in the chair and then stand up from it, give Arnie a high five since he's always up high somewhere, and then sit back down and do a couple reps of those. To grade it up, we would lower the height of the chair so she would have a greater distance to go in order to give Arnie his high five. And then to grade it down, we would raise the height of the chair to give her a little more ease in order to do that. And for the task-oriented approach, we chose actually sitting down, trying to get down to the floor in order to eat at that table. So we decided she would use a support structure, kind of similar to grab bars, but maybe have rungs on it, to get herself down to the floor, and then she would either need assistance to get down there, and she would probably definitely need assistance to get back up, but we would work on trying to get her to do that on her own using those grab bars. So to grade it up, she would use a lower rung to lower herself and raise herself, and hopefully we would go from higher to lower as she started lowering herself. And then to grade it down, she would use a higher rung to get down there, and probably moderate assistance to lower herself and raise herself up.
So, in terms of using those rungs, you're talking about a higher rung as opposed to, height-wise would be higher up and the lower rung would be lower down, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And which one would be harder?
We're saying the lower one would be harder because she has to get lower in the first place by herself to get there and then use it to get lower versus, and I think it might be different going back up.
A higher one would be, well, a lower one would be harder to get back up because you have to push and then you're still kind of in a squatting
Yeah.
position and you have to continue to stand up. But a higher one, you can mostly pull yourself up with your legs assisting your arms.
Yeah, so it would be switched. So going down, the lower rung would be harder, and going up, the higher one would be harder.
Higher one would be easier.
The reason I'm asking is we need to think through this process because in terms of strength, if you're only thinking of going down, you also have to think in terms of coming up, right? And so as therapists, when we plan an activity, you've got to be careful about what we've set up because then if you take them down to the floor, you've got to bring them up at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, so think through that, and we'll talk about it, and let's see what may be the right thing to do. I like the idea that you use task-oriented approach. I like the idea of actually engaging her in the task in terms of getting her down and getting her up. But let's look at in terms of what type of a rung we need to use and where the location of the rung needs to be for her to go down and then come back up. Okay, so the questions.
Okay. Yes, so we have like a little game type thing. So we made food. It's called mango cake, but it's not really a cake. It's more like a frozen custard type thing.
Dessert, yeah.
We're not sure, but it should taste good. And so what we wanted to do is invite a representative from each group to come up and answer a question. And the way that you will like buzz in is to stand up. So like our activity is sit to stand or stand to sit. So that's kind of the idea.
And we'll have you sit on the floor and then have to stand up as fast as you can before someone else does. So who paid attention and who can stand up?
Yeah, and then so there's 5 questions and 4 people in each group, so I want
Can we get a mango cake?
it's over here.
Okay.
Stand up.
Are there 5 groups?
No, it's just
Is there only 4 groups? turn around so you can see the questions.
Are you gonna like put it up and be like,
Yeah.
so it's like whoever can read the fastest?
Oh, yes.
I got this.
Do you want to read them too?
Just start standing and start it.
Wait up for me. You can read them. I'll read them.
Okay, ready?
Alright, question 1. What religion do the majority of Burmese practice?
Amy.
Buddhism.
Megan.
Yes.
Come on, Megan, that was not a good starting position. What are the primary occupation of Burmese women?
I didn't bring it.
Primary occupation. Oh, domestic work at the home, teaching and nursing, all the above.
Yay.
In what setting are meals eaten?
Yeah, I can make it.
Okay. At the low table, so you're on the point.
The lights are kind of
When interacting with Burmese client, all of the following are etiquette rules that you should follow except. Except.
Wait, you want to do all of them except?
Yeah. Which one do you not do?
You don't want to point your feet at them.
Yes.
Away from them.
Oh,
Touch the head too, right?
Yeah, but it's
But
a.
it's always do not.
So it's like, do not touch their head.
Do not do that.
Practice right on.
Yeah.
Tricky.
But
don't not do it.
True or false? Obesity is considered atypical.
Caroline.
Megan, correct. You're letting us